calling the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
Madam
The
President.
Senate is not in a quorum call. So you may speak.
Thank you. Thank you. Since we're talking about farm legislation as well as nutrition legislation, I think I should be very transparent when I talk about this and tell you about my background and lifetime in farming, because I don't want to say something about farm bills that people don't know where I'm coming from and then find out later that I'm a farmer and might benefit from some of the farm programs. So in the vein of transparency and accountability, I would say that since 1960, when my father died, I've been involved in farming. Since 1980, I've been involved with my son Robin, renting my farmland, farming what we call in Iowa 50-50 farming. You might call it crop share, but basically that means that he and I are partners, and I pay for half the expenses, and I get half of the crop to market, and he gets the land rent-free. And that when you're crop sharing or when you're 50-50, that means that I'm not an absentee landowner collecting cash rent, that I've got risk, and with risk you assume that maybe you might get a crop or not get a crop, and if you don't get a crop, you don't get your rent as a landlord. Same for my son. He has risk as well, and if he doesn't get a crop, he won't have to pay rent, but he isn't going to have anything to live on if he doesn't have a crop. So that's kind of the situation that I've been in since 1960, when I was farming on my own and then in partnership with my son. In the last 7 or 8 years, we've had a grandson, Patrick Grassley, a member of the state legislature, join our farming operation. And you know what I found out with having a grandson in the farming operation? They don't have a lot of work for a grandfather to do. So last year, about all I did was fall tillage with what we call in Iowa chisel plowing. With that background, then I want to go to my statement. Growing up on my family farm outside of New Hartford, Iowa, where I still live today, I grew to appreciate what it means to be a farmer. The dictionary defines a farmer as a, quote, a person who cultivates land or crops or raises animals, end of quote. But that definition doesn't come close to fully describing what a farmer is. Being a farmer means someone willing to help a cow deliver her calf in the middle of the night when it might be 5 degrees outside. A farmer is someone who is willing to put all of their earthly possessions at risk just to put a bunch of seed in the ground and hope that the seed gets rain at just the right time. Farmers work hard cultivating crops and get the satisfaction of seeing the result of their hard work at the end of each crop season. They take great pride in knowing that they're feeding this nation, and a farmer in Iowa produces enough food to feed 160 other people. So obviously, we export about 1/3 of our agricultural production. And farmers tend to be people who relish the independence that comes with their chosen profession. They're people with dirt under their fingernails, and they also work very long hours, and often are underappreciated for what they do to put food on America's dinner table, and they receive an ever-shrinking share of the food dollar. At this point, I would speak about a fellow senator. I won't name the fellow senator, but he's from an urban state. And throughout our years of service here, I like to say to him, do you know that food grows on farms? And he says, oh, does it? Well, the other night at the spouses' dinner that we had, he came up to my wife and he said, you know, I know food grows in supermarkets, but Chuck thinks it grows on farms. So that's the sort of camaraderie we have around here on agriculture, and I'm very glad to have it because I always say agriculture is probably a little easier in the United States Senate because I believe every United States senator, even in Alaska, even in Hawaii, even in New Hampshire, every senator represents agriculture to some degree. Maybe not as much as they do in the Midwest where I come from, or California or Texas, but every state has some agriculture, and there's an appreciation of it. Where in the other body, our House of Representatives, I don't know an exact figure, but I would imagine that there's probably only 50 districts that really are agricultural-oriented districts, and the rest of them are very urban or suburban. So we have an understanding of agriculture, how important it is, and when I talk about it, you know, I don't mean to be talking down to my colleagues, but I do think I understand agriculture. And not that other senators don't understand agriculture, but I think if you've been involved in it in a lifetime, like 3 or 4 of us here in the Senate have been, it means a little more to you. Farmers have chosen a line of work that comes with risk that is inherent in farming and often out of their control. The risk inherent in farming is why we have farm programs. I digress a little bit from memory here just to show you that there's a lot of things in agriculture that are beyond the control of farmers, and I'm not talking just about natural disaster of hail or drought, but just think about Nixon in 1972 wanting to get reelected so bad that he freezes the price of beef. Now, only for a short period of time, maybe 3 or 4 months, because they found out it wasn't working the way they wanted to work it. But he wanted to protect the consumer. He didn't care anything about the farmers. But Iowa was #1 in beef production up to that time. And after everybody got squeezed out of the beef business because of the freeze, we went from #1 down to #13. Now I think we're back at about 5th or 6th in the production of beef. It's just an example. Or when soybeans were being exported and they got up to 13%, $13 a bushel in I think it was 1973 or 74. Maybe it was let's see, I'm just trying to think. Was Nixon president or Ford? But one or the other, they decided, well, it's going to drive up the price of food in America. So they forbid the export of soybeans. And they fell from $13 down to $3. Or Carter decides that it's wrong for Russia to invade Afghanistan, and by golly, we're selling them wheat, and we aren't going to sell them any more wheat. So the price drops. And I suppose I ought to think of a lot of things more recently, but there's a lot of international politics that affects farming. Right now with Iran and sanctions and oil, to what extent that affects the price of energy, and agriculture is a big production of energy. So what I'm trying to say to you with just a few examples, and I ought to have more from memory, that there are so many things that are beyond the control of farmers that if you ever wonder why we have a farm safety net, that's it. That's it. And why do we have a farm safety net? For national security? Because as you know, as Napoleon said, an army marches on its belly, you got to have food. Why do you think Japan and Germany protect their farmers so much today? Because they found out in World War II that if you don't have food, you don't have very good national security. Or how long can a nuclear submarine stay underwater? Forever, except if it runs out of food, it's got to come up. Or what about the old adage of being 9 meals away from a revolution? In other words, if as a mother and dad you can't get food for your kids for 3 days and they're crying, you might take any action to make sure they get it. So I think that having a sure supply of food is very essential to the social cohesion of our society. Now, we don't worry about that in America, do we? Because you go to the supermarket and the shelves are full. But there's a lot of places in the world where you don't do that. There's a lot of places in the world where you pay more than 50% of your income on disposable income on food, and in America it's about 9, 10, or 11%. So there's plenty of reasons to make sure that we have a sound agricultural system in America, and we ought to make sure that we take that seriously, both from a national security standpoint and for our social betterment. If we want a stable food supply in this country, we need farmers who are able to produce it. When they're hit by floods, droughts, natural disaster, wild market swings, and unfair international barriers to their products, farmers need the support to make it through, because so much is beyond the control of farmers. Most farmers I know wish that there wasn't the need for a government safety net, but they appreciate that safety net when they do need it. And for decade after decade, Congress has maintained farm programs because the American people understand the necessity of providing a safety net for those providing our food. That's not to say that each and every farm program ever created needs to continue. In fact, there's a lot of things in this farm bill that we have before us that bring reform, and some programs not reauthorized, that prove what I just said, that just because we've had something for 60 years doesn't mean you have to have it for the next 5 years of this farm program. Just as there are shifts in the market, sometimes public sentiment towards certain farm programs also shift. Take direct payments, for instance. There was a time and place for direct payments to help farmers through some lean years. But now times are okay in agriculture industry, and the American people have rightly decided it's time for farm payments to end. Also, with $1.5 trillion deficit every year, it's also a reality that those payments can't continue from a budget point of view. So the Senate committee has responded, and we have proposed eliminating the direct payment program. And many farmers agree direct payments should go away as well. There are other reforms the American taxpayers want to see. There is no reason the federal government should be subsidizing big farmers to get even bigger. I might repeat myself as I go through my statement, but I want to say here, you know, a farm safety net ought to protect the people that don't have the ability to get beyond these things that are beyond their control, whether it's domestic politics or whether it's natural disaster or whether it's international politics or energy policies or all the things that can happen. There's some farmers that might not get over that hump. That's beyond their control. A problem that's created that affects them financially. But there are some farmers that have that capability, and I think traditionally we have geared the farm program, not enough, my point of view, but geared the farm program towards a safety net for small and medium-sized farmers. And we have a situation where 10% of the farmers in recent years, the biggest farmers, are getting 70% of the benefits of the farm program. There's nothing wrong with getting bigger. I want to make that clear. In fact, in agriculture, with the equipment that costs, you got to get bigger. But the federal taxpayers should not be subsidizing farmers to get bigger. And it isn't just a case of a principle not to do that. It's the economic impact that when you do that, that you find that the government subsidy to the big farmers that go out and buy more land drives up the price of farmland, or drives up the cash rent in a particular area, and consequently then it makes it very difficult for young people to get started farming. And we want to be able, and we have to pass this on to the others. Many farmers understand that in order for us to have a farm program that is defensible and justifiable, it needs to be a program designed to help these small and medium-sized farmers who actually need the assistance getting through rough patches out of their control. So what I've been trying to do for years finally got put in this farm bill, to put a hard cap on the amount of money that one farming operation can get. So hopefully we cut down that 10% that gets 70%, so it's more proportional to the benefit of small and medium-sized farmers. And that's in this bill at $50,000 per individual and $100,000 per married couple for the payments under the Agricultural Risk Coverage Program that's in this bill. Now, I know that to a lot of people listening, that $50,000, that $100,000 is too much. And it's even too much for most Iowans. But there are some sections of this country, like the South and West, where you'll find our fellow senators, I don't know how open they're going to be about this, but behind the scenes they're really raising Cain about this $50,000 cap that we have. And I just about got this put in the present Farm Bill in 2008, except I had 57 votes, but you know how things work around here. You got to have 60 votes to get something done if people want to push the point. And so I didn't get 60 votes. And now it's in the Farm Bill. And I don't know who's negotiating around here on amendments, but there's going to be somebody trying to take this out of here. Somebody from the South, I would imagine, take this $50,000 cap out. And I expect to have the same considerations for this not being taken out by a 60-vote margin as I was kept from putting it in 5 years ago. Because if it had been put in 5 years ago, we would have saved $1 3/10 billion over the period of that period of time. Taxpayers are equally tired of reading reports about how so many non-farmers receive farm payments. I've been working to get reforms in the farm payment eligibility for years, and just as the tide has turned on the status quo for direct payments, the tide has turned on program eligibility. The bill contains crucial reforms to the quote-unquote actively engaged requirements. These reforms will ensure farm payments go to actual farmers. The American people are not going to stand idly by anymore and watch farm payments head out the door to people who don't farm. In other words, if you aren't out there working the land, you're in Wall Street or something, and you got farmland in the Midwest, you shouldn't be collecting these farm payments. There have been some people complaining about this payment limit reforms that I've talked about. They complain that it will detrimentally change the way some farm operations do things. Well, if they mean it won't allow non-farmers to skirt around payment eligibilities and line their pockets with taxpayers' money meant for actual farmers, then the answer is yes. That's what those reforms will do. But let me make it perfectly clear. The reforms contained in this bill will not impact a farmer's ability to receive farm payments. Furthermore, the reform will not affect the spouse rule. In other words, if the husband and wife are together in the farming operation and some senator comes around and tells you that the spouse that's working beside the other spouse in this farming operation can't get the benefits of it, they are wrong. These reforms reflect what we hear from the grassroots, which is Congress needs to be better stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. That's true if we're talking about farm programs or any other federal program. Those who are against these reforms are asking the American people to accept the status quo and to continue to watch as farm payments go to mega farmers and non-farmers. We cannot and will not accept the status quo. In other words, 10% of the biggest farmers getting 70% of the benefits of the farm program ought to end. The Agriculture Committee should be proud of the improvements that we're making to payment limitations in this bill. With these reforms, we bring defensibility and integrity to this farm bill, plus the fact that it's probably the only bill that's going to pass this year that's going to cut any programs, and it's going to do that by $23 billion. In fact, without these reforms in the farm program, I wouldn't be able to support this bill. I urge my colleagues to voice their support for these important payment limitation provisions and join with me in resisting any attempt to weaken these reforms, particularly from people in the southern states. that say that somehow you ought to still continue to have these mega farmers get these millions of payments. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Ms. Ayala.
Senator from Alabama.
It's consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I want to discuss today several amendments I have to the Farm Bill that's now before the Senate. What might surprise many people to learn is that the overwhelming majority of funds in the Farm Bill are not spent on anything to do with farmers or even agriculture production. For instance, crop insurance amounts to just, which is a big part of the new bill and is progress, I think, the crop insurance provisions amount to just 8% of what we'd be spending. Horticulture is less than 1%, but a full 80% of the Farm Bill spending goes to the federal food stamp program. Yet 83% of the small savings that are found in this proposal come from that. $23 billion in cuts, none of which occur next year, out of almost $1 trillion in spending over 10 years, are taken, over almost $1 trillion are taken from the farm provisions. So about $23 billion in cuts, most of that are taken from the farm provisions, the 20% that goes to that. Food stamp spending is virtually untouched. I believe they propose $4 billion in savings in the 80% in the food stamp program and only in $17 billion out of the 20%. So overall, the legislation will spend $82 billion on food stamps next year, $82 billion, and an estimated $770 billion over the next 10 years. So to put these figures in perspective, and they're so large it's difficult to comprehend, we will spend next year $40 billion on the federal highway program, but $80 on the food stamp program. Food stamp spending has more than quadrupled, 4 times. It's increased fourfold since the year 2001. It has increased 100% since President Obama took office, doubled in just that amount of time. There are a number of reasons for this arresting trend. While poor economy has undeniably increased the number of people who qualify for food stamps, this alone does not explain the extraordinary growth in the program. For instance, between 2001 and 2006, food stamp spending doubled, but the unemployment rate remained around 5%. So from 2001 to 2006, we had a doubling of food stamp while unemployment is the same. When the food stamp program was first expanded nationwide, about 1 in 50 Americans received food stamp benefits. Today, nearly 1 in 7 receive food stamp benefits. We need to think about that. This is a very significant event. We need to ask ourselves, is this good policy? Is it good for America? Not only is it a question of, do we have the money? The second thing is it going to the right people? Is the money being expended wisely? Is it helping people become independent? Is it encouraging people to look for ways to be productive and be responsible themselves for their families? Or does it create dependency, part of a series of government programs that in effect aren't beneficial to the people who actually benefit from them in the short term? Three factors help explain this increase. First is that eligibility standards have been significantly loosened over time, with dramatic drop in eligibility standards in the last few years. Second, it has been the explicit policy goal of the federal bureaucracy to increase the number of people on food stamps. Bonus pay is even offered to states who sign more people up. States administer this program. And third, the way the system is arranged with states administering their program, but the federal government providing all the money, all of it. States don't match food stamps. States have an incentive, don't you see, to see their food stamps budget grow, not shrink, because it's more federal money coming into the state for which they have which they pay no part of. So that means overlooking, I'm afraid, I hate to say, dramatic amounts of fraud and abuse, because the enforcement and supervision is given over to the states. So I filed a modest package of food stamp reforms to the Farm Bill, which will achieve several important goals. Save taxpayers dollars, which is a good thing, reduce the deficit, achieve greater accountability in how the program is administered, confront widespread waste, direct food stamps to those who truly need them, and help more Americans achieve financial independence. Now, I guess I'm the only person in the Senate who's ever dealt with fraud in the food stamp program. When I first, shortly after law school, and I was a young federal prosecutor, I prosecuted fraud in the food stamp program. And later I came back as United States Attorney, and we saw drug dealers selling food stamps. We saw various other manipulations of it. As Attorney General of Alabama for a period, I was involved in enforcing integrity in the program. So I know the benefits food stamps play to people in desperate need. I know it's helpful, but I know, Americans know, they see it every day, that there are abuses in this program. It's the fastest growing entitlement program, bar none. And we need to look at it. And I understand there's some that oppose even saving $4 billion over 10 years out of the food stamp program. We're spending $80 a year. Just 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, we were spending $40. We can't do better than that. So it's now the food stamps is the second largest federal welfare program following Medicaid. And the food stamp spending were returned next year. Just if we were next year were to go back to the 2007 funding levels, and you agreed to increase it for 10 years at the rate of inflation, that would produce an astonishing $340 billion in savings to the United States Treasury. And we've got to have some savings because we don't have the money to continue spending at the rate we are. Food stamps are one of 17 federal nutritional support programs and one of nearly 80 federal welfare programs. So there's no confusion. These figures count only low-income support programs, so there's no confusion. These figures count only low-income support programs, and they don't include Medicare, Social Security, or unemployment benefits. Collectively, our federal welfare programs constitute about $700 billion in federal spending and $200 billion in state contributions to the same programs. Well, that's about $900 billion on federal-state combined programs, most of it federal. $900 billion is about 1/4 of the entire federal budget. So an individual on food stamps may receive as much as $25,000 in various forms of financial assistance for their households from the federal government, as much as $25,000. in addition to whatever salary they may earn, part-time work or full-time work, and any support they may receive from their family or community. So, in other words, this is not normally the only source of income for a person. Changes in eligibility have been eliminated, changes in eligibility for food stamps have eliminated the asset test for food stamp benefits, which brings me to the first of 4 amendments I've filed. Number 1, let's restore the asset test for food stamps like it always was. This change has been quite significant. Through a system known as categorical eligibility, states can provide benefits to those whose assets exceed the statutory asset limit, as long as they receive some other federal program. Why is this? I don't know. It makes no sense to me. So if you qualify for another program, you automatically get food stamps. Categorically, you're eligible to get them. One state went so far as to determine that individuals were food stamp eligible solely because they received a brochure from another benefit program in the mail. Well, that meant there's more money from the federal government coming into their state, more benefit. I guess they see it as an economic benefit. Didn't cost them any money. Money came from Washington. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the simple process of going back and restricting the categorical eligibility problem that's now springing up would produce $12 billion in savings for taxpayers over the next 10 years and should not eliminate a single person who qualifies for food stamps. All it would mean is you don't get it if you qualify for something else, but if you qualify for food stamps and fill out the proper form, you get it, like everybody else has to do. Second, there is the heating subsidy loophole. 15 states are using a loophole in order to get more food stamp dollars from the federal government. They do this by mailing a very small check. Get this. They mail a small check, often less than $1 a month, under the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, the LIHEAP program. And anyone who receives that check, which may be as little as a few dollars a year, becomes eligible to claim a lower income on the basis of home energy expenses, even if they don't pay those expenses. So this reform will require households that receive food stamps to provide proof of payment for their heating or cooling in order to qualify for the deduction. If the government is paying for your heating, you shouldn't say, I need food stamps because I've got a big heating bill, if the government's paying for it. But this clever maneuver, designed by states, frankly, deliberately, to extract more money from Washington, free money for their states, is not good policy for America. And it's not right that some states get more under the food stamp programs by using this technique than other states who don't use this abusive practice. So closing this loophole will produce $14 billion in savings over the next 10 years. And that's a lot of money. Number 3, let's end the bonuses, the bonus payments that are going to states for increasing the number of people who sign up. We ought to be giving bonuses to states who identify people who are abusing the program and bringing those down. If anything, states currently receive a bonus payment for enrolling individuals in the program. Those bonus payments highlight the perverse incentive states have to expand food stamp registration rather than to reduce fraud and help more people achieve financial independence. We need to be focusing on helping get people to work, to being productive, bringing in far more money for their families than food stamps would bring in. That's the focus of American vitality and growth. So that's number 3. Number 4, let's implement the E-Verify program for food stamp usage. This amendment would simply require the government to use a very simple E-Verify program to assure that adults receiving benefits are in fact lawfully in the country. This is a common sense thing to do at a time when we have to borrow 40 cents of every dollar we spend in this government. We spend $3,700 billion. We take in $2,300, $400 billion. We borrow the rest every year. We can't afford to be providing incentives, benefits, bonuses, and payments to reward people who've entered the country illegally. We just don't have the money. Ultimately, beyond first steps, the best way to achieve integrity in the food stamp program is to block grant it to states. Just send so much of the program, a fair percentage, to each state and let them distribute it. This will provide states with a strong incentive to make sure that each dollar is being appropriately spent. They don't have that incentive today. It's no damage to a state if somebody is getting the money improperly or getting more than they are entitled to. But if a state is administering the program and some people are getting too much and other people are not getting enough, then the state has an incentive to make sure the abuses stop and the aid goes to the people who really need it. And that's the kind of program we need in America, one that works, that has incentives built in to make the program have integrity. The House budget adopts this reform. They like to complain about the House and say the House doesn't know what they're doing. This is a common sense reform. I'm proud of what the House did. They did exactly the right thing. Senate Democrats, of course, have not even written a budget in 3 years. So it would become clear if we'd gone through a financial analysis, a budget debate in this Congress, that we could save a lot of money by ending the abuses in the food stamp program, and it would help us do other things the government needs to do. So it would also become clear that we will run out of money to pay for this program if we don't make changes. Now, we are in a financial situation that's so grave, as every expert has told us, we are on an unsustainable path, and we've got to get off of it. And if we don't, we could have another financial catastrophe, like we did in 2007, like they're having in Europe today. That is very possible. So we've got to reduce our deficits, and we've got to reduce abusive spending. Reforming the way we deliver welfare is the compassionate course. It's not mean-spirited to say that people who are not entitled to the benefits, don't need the benefits, should not get them. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having incentives in your program, not to see how many people you can put on food stamps, but to see how many people we can get to work and be productive and create jobs. And the result of welfare reform in 1996, if you remember that, and many of you do, was less poverty, more growth, less teen pregnancy, more work, and more people successfully caring for themselves. And we slipped back, in my opinion. We moved back from some of the progress we made in the 1996 provisions. So unfortunately, since 1996, members in both parties have failed to protect these gains. The welfare budget has swelled dramatically, oversight has diminished, standards have slipped, so we now find ourselves in need of welfare reform for the 21st century. We just do. It's the nature of any business, any government, that programs once established continue beyond rationality and need to be reformed periodically. So it's time to re-engage the national discussion over how the receipt of welfare benefits can become damaging, not merely to the Treasury, but also to the recipient. Left unattended, the safety net can become a restraint, permanently removing people from the workforce, and federal programs, unmonitored, that can begin to replace family, church, community as a source of aid and support. We need to reestablish the moral principle that federal welfare should be seen as temporary assistance, not permanent support. The goal should be to help people become independent, self-sufficient. Such reforms made sincerely and with concern for those in need will improve America's social, fiscal, and economic health. Empowering the individual is more than sound policy. It remains the animating moral idea behind the American experience, our national exceptionalism. And we believe in individual responsibility. We believe in helping people in need, but we don't believe in creating circumstances where decent, hard-working people who work extra, who save their money, who give up vacations and going out to eat so they can take care of their family, are also required to support people who are irresponsible. That's not a healthy situation for us to be in. So we need to strike the right balance. We help those people in need and create a government and a social assistance program in America that benefits the people we seek to benefit and benefit the United States Treasury at the same time. Mr. President, I appreciate the opportunity to share these remarks and will yield the floor. And note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.